I was in the US Army for 10 plus years. Here's the story. I was in the Army for 10 years. During that time, I traveled all over the world for deployments and training ops. I've seen a lot of bad stuff the world has to offer, and a lot of the good. I was an infantryman and sniper, and during my first deployment to Iraq, I spent a lot of time sitting on rooftops or inside abandoned buildings. I would watch streets, city blocks, whatever, trying to pin down patterns of life and get a better idea of what was happening out in the sector. Often my 3-man team would get attached to a line platoon and go out on a 24 to 48 hour mission to get eyes on an intersection or building where we suspected the enemy moved. 99.9% of the time, everything went according to plan. We would either spend all day looking at nothing, or we would get compromised at the break of dawn and get into a day-long gunfight. Or, if we were really lucky, we would get the drop on the bad guys and end up ambushing them. A couple of times though, things would happen that really defied logic or expectation. Now understand that throughout this whole period of my life, I was almost always sleep deprived, hungry, under extreme levels of stress. I don't discount the idea that at least some of what I experienced was due to the above factors playing tricks on my mind or whatever. Oh, also I've had 2 paranormal experiences before the army. Don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but worth mentioning. Baghdad. We were on a foot patrol to check out a part of our sector we rarely went to. Not for any specific reason. The bad guys never went there, so we never went there. The whole area, about 3 city blocks, had been a Christian neighborhood before the fall of Saddam, but after law and order broke down completely, the Christians were either forced out or murdered. We were just going from building to building at night, checking things out. We found this one house with a room on the roof that had been built separately from the main structure, which in and of itself was pretty common. What was strange was that this room had a door that was locked from the inside. It was a sheet metal door with a hand latch on the inside which you could lock with a padlock. For some reason this intrigued me, and I had an urge to find out what was in there. So we proceeded to go to town on this door with our breaching kit. It took about 20 minutes of solid work before we yanked this door open. First off, at this point I'm a seasoned combat soldier, seen some stuff, did some stuff, not easily spooked. This room scared the crap out of me as soon as we opened the door. There was a single hallway leading back to a T intersection. It was pitch black and the smell wafting out of there was like a butcher shop. Blood, raw meat, etc. My hackles are up at attention at this point. There were several rooms, all with dried blood covering the floor, smears on the walls. It was evident some horrific stuff had happened in there. The last room contained an old metal bed frame with leather restraints and wires running off to the opposite corner where a car battery sat. Also, there was an oppressive heaviness to the whole place, like the air had weight. We got the hell out of there as quickly as we could. The strangest part was that it was locked with a padlock and deadbolted from the inside, but there was absolutely no other way out besides the door. No windows, one door, locked from the inside. We never figured that one out, but I still think about it from time to time. That same night, we found another house locked up from the inside. Bullet holes all over the walls and "Please God help us" written over and over on the wall in Arabic. The words were written in red ink, and I swear to God, one of the words was dripping wet red down the wall. Our interpreter said it was a bad place, and we noped the hell out of there back to the COP as quickly as possible. Part 2. I managed to get in touch with some of my buddies and pry some spooky stuff out of them. To a man, they all explained away their experiences as some sort of natural phenomenon, or lack of sleep, or stress, etc. That doesn't change the fact that lots of guys I know experienced things they couldn't explain at one time or another. Around the fall of 2008, we were back from Iraq and trying to settle back into the garrison mindset, dial things back a notch, as it were. Everyone was waiting to go on block leave for 30 days and come back ready for round 2. It was during that time I got promoted to sergeant and put in charge of my first fire team. Part of every new NCO's duties is to provide the beer for a platoon-wide NCOPD, or Non-Commissioned Officer Professional Development, class. Basically an excuse for all the sergeants to get blasted together and swap stories, share advice, and stuff like that. One of the senior guys in my company had been in the army for quite a while. He had been to Somalia for Black Hawk Down, Kosovo, Bosnia, and Desert Storm before IOF and OEF. He told me about waiting on the Saudi side of the berm, waiting to go into Iraq, stealth fighters and bombers flying by overhead to knock out Iraqi army positions, the roar of paladins loosing their missiles against unsuspected armor and infantry miles away. They waited in that desert for 6 months before finally crossing into Kuwait. By the time they got there, the war was pretty much over. He was with an armored cavalry unit and saw some limited action, mainly against poorly trained and equipped conscript units in ancient Soviet tanks. The American war machine swept over those poorly defended positions easily, and within 72 hours, the ground war was over. Now, I know everyone has seen Jarhead and seen the news of the Highway of Death. My buddy wasn't involved in that part of the ground action. His unit was part of the Anvil the retreating Iraqis hit during their flight from Kuwait. After everything was said and done, they still spent the next few months on the ground basically cleaning everything up. He told me stories about clearing Iraqi bunkers and trench complexes, sifting through the remains of entire companies wiped out in bombing or whatever. Up to this point, what he described was pretty typical of a major ground action, but I still can't imagine finding myself in the position of being in a major conventional war. He went on to describe one day in particular, toward the end of his time on the ground. They woke up from their hastily dug fighting positions in the middle of the desert, wiped the grime out of their eyes, ate a quick MRE and trucked to a destroyed Iraqi radar site. His platoon was tasked with collecting any intelligence they might find, and collecting dog tags off the corpses that littered what seemed like the entire Kuwaiti desert. They still had to be careful. A handful of guys had already been killed by booby traps that the Iraqis strung up before retreating. They arrived on site and started their sweep. There were dozens of charred corpses scattered around outside. The site was a relatively deep and well-constructed bunker that contained the CP and a trench line about 100 meters long. Strewn about were pictures of kids, wives, and personal effects, letters, books. Anything that hadn't been destroyed in the bombing was collected by the troops as war trophies or brought back to S2 for analysis. He found himself alone down in the bunker. It was a rectangular concrete box with a machine gun slit in the front. Think Saving Private Ryan. The roof was half collapsed, with a large hole punched through it where a bunker buster had burrowed down and incinerated the occupants. There was a dead Iraqi slumped across a DSS-HK machine gun, the Soviet version. He said even then he got a really creepy vibe down there. Aside from the dead machine gunner, there were the remains of at least 3 others in there, but they were closer to being completely atomized. They must have been directly under the bomb when it fell. My buddy quickly snatched the machine gunner's dog tags off his neck, stuffed them in his pocket, and left back to the surface. Later on, the platoon was gathered together eating lunch in the scorched sand. He described it like Jarhead, where every time he took a step, it left a footprint of white sand in the blackened top layer. Anyway, the guys were comparing stories about what they had seen and what trophies they had collected. They got down to the dog tags they had, and started comparing the number they had managed to collect. Some guys had a pile of tags, others only had a few. My buddy had the one set he found on the machine gunner. He went on to tell some friends about how creepy it had been in the bunker, and how he had felt kinda bad for that gunner, manning his position to the last, maybe covering his buddy's retreat in the face of the Americans. One of his friends asked, "What machine gunner?" He had been down in the bunker and he hadn't seen any bodies down there. Thinking his friend was mistaken, maybe there was a different bunker he hadn't seen, he went back after lunch to make sure. He stepped down into the bunker and, sure enough, there was the DSS-HK, with no gunner. He said at this point his hair was standing on end. He was sure the dead guy had been there. That's when he noticed the drag marks through the charred topsoil. They led across the floor and up the steps to the surface. He followed them out away from the fighting position, about 50 meters. Lying in the sand was the gunner. His body was frozen in a low crawl position, left leg straight back, right knee cocked up, left arm reaching forward and raised off the ground as if reaching for something, maybe a way home. He assumed one of the sick people in his platoon had moved the body, but when he asked, no one fessed up. On the drive back, he realized the machine gunner had been facing towards the Iraqi border. Paranormal, maybe, but very frightening. I'm a 46-year-old male from the UK. A bit about myself. I have a full service career in the army, including some punchy operational deployments. Without sounding like a douche, I'm fairly tough. I tend to run towards trouble if it arises. I'm not scared of much. I've spent the last few years working as a groundsman and a gardener for a lovely property very close to where I live. It's a large house with substantial grounds. Huge lawn, orchards, walled gardens, and woodland. It's also a B&B with 3 rooms and is used for wakes and weddings. There probably isn't an inch of the gardens that I haven't cut, pruned, or landscaped over the last few years. I work alone and am totally content with being by myself. Sometimes I wear headphones, sometimes I like the peace and quiet. Occasionally I see guests, usually in the mornings after breakfast, but more often than not I see no one all day. So one day I'm cutting back some rhododendron bushes either side of some paths. They're thick bushes and the paths are almost like tunnels, so fairly dark and shady even on sunny days. I tend to work for 45 minutes to an hour, then have a quick smoke and coffee break. So I down tools and head up the path towards a bench where I'll take 5. As the path bends round, it opens up to a sort of clearing where the bench is. Looking back, I'm 99% sure I had headphones on playing music. As I approach the clearing, I see a man standing completely still. The immediate thing that looked odd was that he was only an inch away from the bushes, like a kid that's been told to face a wall, and that his trousers were too short. I pulled my earphones out and said something like, "Sorry, I didn't see you there." Then the weird stuff happened. Instantly, the whole atmosphere felt wrong. There was a really heavy, still feeling in the air, and less the tinny music from my earphones, it was silent. Like, totally silent. I stopped in my tracks. I cannot describe in words the feeling of utter terror that fell over me. The man radiated absolute threat. Maybe you'd call it evil. I just knew that if he turned to face me, it would be a bad thing. It was obvious he was old. His suit didn't fit and his arms looked too long. I wish I could describe him better, but I backed up out of there ASAP. I never once took my eyes off him. I had this feeling that if I did, I'd be in trouble. To cut the rest of the story as short as possible, I put in a loop around the gardens to a metal workshop on the grounds where I persuaded some welders to come back with me to figure it out. They were making fun of me pretty hard, but I think they could see I was shaken. When we got to the clearing, they weren't exactly rushing in. Anyway, the guy wasn't there. The air was back to normal and the birds were singing. I wish I could say there was a burnt patch of grass or something, but there was simply no sign of anything untoward. Maybe it was an odd guest, maybe it was a tramp, or maybe it was something very different. All I know is I've never felt that frightened of anything in all my years. Jinn Paranormal Encounters While Deployed, North Iraq, 2019-2020. Got back not too long ago and thought I'd share my experiences. We get into the country and it's nothing big, just doing our jobs in the desert. Due to the nature of my job/mission, I was confined to the FOB. I worked nights the whole tour, so my work hours were 9 PM to 9 AM. As you can imagine, I slept during the day. A bit of background. The base was a premier duty station for the Iraqi military. It was built in the 1970s, 1980s to accommodate the expanding army under Saddam's rule. So Gulf War 91 happens and we bombed it out. 03 we invade again and guess what? Bombed out, then occupied until 2011 when given back to the Iraqis. So countless suicides or combat-related deaths from years of surge and peak insurgency. 2014 bombed out again, because ISIS overtook it and was using it as a death camp. Olympic swimming pools on location were full of bodies, and there was a steamroller used for running people over. 2014 to now, occupied by Iraqi army, so as you could imagine, this could be a hotbed of stuff. Occurrence number 1, kind of funny and weird. It was about a month into tour and I was dead asleep in my room. We slept in a 6x6 room with a roommate. I was fortunate enough to never see him since we had opposite shifts. I was racked out with my back to the center of the room, and I woke up to a slight grab to the back of my arm. I roll over and see what is 6'4", looking all black and shadowy, and standing 6 feet from me. I wear glasses and my vision is absolutely awful, so assuming it was one of my soldiers waking me up, I roll back over after putting on my glasses and nothing was there. So tripped out, I get a hold of my roommate and he chalks it up to some bad dream, and so did I. 2 months go by and business as usual. I go to work at 9 and my roommate settles in. Taking advantage of him being alone, he attempts to pleasure himself. After finishing, he sits up trying to clean up and head to the shower, and the ambient light of his headlamp lights up in my end of the room. He notices something out of the corner of his eye and he looks to see what he said was a big ass guy, big like its feet portion were hanging off your bed, like a college dorm sized twin bed, and it was all black. So pretty much a shadow dude laying in my bed. He said fight or flight hit him because he was cleaning off after pleasuring himself, and he froze up. After looking away and back again when trying to find the actual light switch, it was gone. So he believed it after that and thought it wasn't just a dream. We told our PSG, a platoon sergeant, at chow the next day, and he was amused and interested. He's a believer in the paranormal and decided to speak his part. According to him, at this point in the tour, so about 3 months in, he's seen someone leave my room at odd times in the middle of the day, times that I'm sleeping, and walk to the room across from us. The thing with the room across is that it had a padlocked plywood door and was locked because the guys who slept there were in Syria, so much of their gear they had to leave behind was still in there. You can't get in without hopping the plywood walls. So that was the extent of the creepy stuff with my living space. I don't think it's a djinn, but my interpreter said it probably was since it kept getting close to me and manifested physically. If I could describe it, it would look similar to the shadow dude captured on the Ghosts of Carmel, Maine YouTube channel. Not spot on because I saw the shadow of a rather jacked and tall person. Occurrence number 2 was weird, ominous stuff. Taking a dump in the Port Johns at night and you'd hear footsteps or whispers around you. You're in a toilet next to a watchtower that's 150 to 300 meters away from another group of soldiers at 3 AM. Nobody is awake to mess with you except the other guy in the tower, and he can't abandon his watch since he's covering. Occurrence number 3 was pretty weird. I attended a sleep aid class with the medics and whatnot since I was having trouble sleeping soundly, and in the group there were soldiers waking up with bad dreams and scratches on them, some of which were bad enough they bled and it dried during their sleep. They discovered after they woke up to bloody sheets. Nobody said anything other than the medic asking if he needs to look at it. Some entry point guys who man a big gate with obstacles would hear commotion like banging on the metal at the main gate at night and would go check it out and nothing would come of it. Towers would report people walking in the open area around the perimeter at night. Some would notice something on their NODS, night vision, or in the darkness that their eyes adjusted to. But when the SOG, the sergeant on guard, or other response elements would check it out, nothing would be there. A woman screaming was reported from towers in the vicinity of a bombed out bunker and an abandoned half-destroyed building on the far end of the FOB. SOG responded, and we had no personnel report an assault. Yes, it does happen out there, and nobody come up missing or astray. Tower didn't report anyone in the area other than SOGs and relief around that time. And that's my spooky Iraq experience y'all asked me to share. Odd occurrences on a military base that I promised to share. This is a copy of a report I filed while in the military. I've scrubbed the name of the base and the names of those involved. I don't for a second think this is the only paranormal case on a military base, and that these things continue to this day in other locations. Commanding Officer, Colonel W. Purpose: cited agencies shall investigate the selected residence for anomalous activity with findings of causation and mitigation recommendations. Preliminary findings. First documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 17th of September 1961 to the family of Tech Sergeant C, having been assigned Housing Unit A since the 2nd of December the prior year. Response records on file indicate that emergency responders were called to the scene with a report of an unresponsive infant. Responding crews transported the infant and mother to the hospital, where the infant was pronounced dead at 01:30, 17th of December 1961. Cause of death, as cited on the response report, was determined by Dr. Colonel C as crib death, what we now call sudden infant death syndrome. The second documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 3rd of May 1962 to the family of Master Sergeant W. Responding crews to Housing Unit B arrived to find Master Sergeant W deceased on his own living room couch from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The spouse of Staff Sergeant M, living next door in Unit A, contacted the fire department and security forces when she heard the gunshot from Unit B. Security forces' findings revealed that Master Sergeant W and his spouse were having financial difficulties and had been called to the residence on 2 other occasions for a report of domestic disturbance. It is believed by this investigative team that insufficient attention was paid to the domestic disturbances out of consideration for Master Sergeant W's placement as Deputy Chief of Security Forces. The third documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 28th of January 1972. Crews responded to a report of a female that had slipped in the upstairs shower and was unresponsive. The incident report indicates that Senior Airman S had been stepping out of the shower when she lost her footing and fell backward. It was believed by security forces that she was unable to stop her fall due to the slick surfaces she could have grabbed onto. Responders found her unresponsive with obvious spinal trauma indicated in C1 through C4. Efforts were made on scene to revive Senior Airman S with CPR and assisted breathing, and transported her to Minot Air Force Base Hospital, where she was pronounced dead by physicians upon arrival. The fourth documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 31st of October 1973. Crews responded to the basement of Unit B when called by Tech Sergeant S when she had gone to the housing unit to see why Senior Sergeant M had failed to contact her over the radio for a facility update. Senior Sergeant M had been called to Unit B to work on a dryer in the basement that was having electrical problems. There were no other people in the unit at the time. Tech Sergeant S indicated that last radio communication had occurred around 08:30 and responding crews had arrived on scene at 12:42. Investigation indicated that Staff Sergeant M had been electrocuted from improper grounding of the dryer's wiring at the panel. Forensics determined that Staff Sergeant M had likely been electrocuted around 8:30 and had remained in the basement alone until discovered by his supervisor. Staff Sergeant M was pronounced dead at the scene. The fifth documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on August 9, 1981, when the housing unit was being renovated. There were no occupants assigned at the time. Responders were called with a report of a worker that had fallen from the roof onto a vehicle below. Upon arrival, crews found Mr. K unresponsive, laying next to a Ford pickup parked near the housing unit. Fellow workers had attempted CPR, but were unable to revive their colleague by the time emergency responders arrived. The investigation report indicated that Mr. K had sustained several broken ribs that subsequently punctured the patient's lungs, drowning the patient in his own blood prior to emergency responders' arrival. Emergency responders transported Mr. K to the MAFB hospital, where he was unable to be revived. The sixth documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 12th of March 1986. Emergency responders were called to Unit B by Staff Sergeant R. Responders arrived to find an unresponsive female in the basement, dead by obvious neck trauma from an electrical extension cord. The investigation report indicated that Staff Sergeant R and his 3 children were upstairs eating breakfast around 06:30 when his wife told them that she was going downstairs to start the laundry. When she had failed to come back upstairs, one of the children went downstairs to see what was taking her so long. The children found Staff Sergeant R's wife hanging from the rafter. Staff Sergeant R attempted to revive his wife with CPR and had one of his children contact emergency responders. Responding units were unsuccessful in reviving his wife and immediately transported her to MAFB Hospital, where she was pronounced dead on arrival. Security Forces investigation indicated that the wife had not given indication of depression or suicidal tendencies prior to the incident. The 7th documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 17th of January, 1993. Security forces were called to the duplex when occupants from both Unit A and B were filing a formal complaint of breaking and entering. According to the police report, the occupants of both units had on several previous occasions found their front door was not only unlocked, but partially ajar when neither occupant had children and both swore that their respective doors had not only been closed, but locked. Housing maintenance was called and told to replace the door locks. This report is also the first directly indicating that the occupants of both Unit A and B were hearing someone walking up the stairs or through the house when no one else was in the house with me. Quote, security forces responded to Unit A later that evening when it was reported that once again the door was not only unlocked, but was partially ajar. Housing maintenance confirmed that new locks had been installed and that no one other than the occupants and housing maintenance had the new keys. Investigative note. Provided in this report for additional consideration are copies of the Security Forces reports filed thereafter by Staff Sergeant U in Unit A and Staff Sergeant B in Unit B, citing strange noises coming from elsewhere in the house, the sound of a baby crying in the master bedroom, items always left in the same place routinely being found in different, unlikely locations throughout the house. It must be noted that neither Staff Sergeant U nor Staff Sergeant B have families. In total, there were 17 reports filed between the 2 staff sergeants that year alone, citing various unexplained events. The 8th documented incident within the structure and grounds occurred on the 27th of June, 1995, when Staff Sergeant R filed a complaint with her first sergeant claiming extreme unease and a sense of hostility emanating from the house itself. She was assigned to Unit A, and there were no occupants of Unit B at that time. This team contacted Staff Sergeant R and asked for a statement regarding the house unit she stayed in at the time. These are her words. I remember first moving in and feeling extreme unease. I just thought it was my nerves because I was at a new base with a new home. I wasn't married at the time and had my dog Sammy living with me. Sammy refused to go downstairs and growled every time the downstairs door was opened. I always felt extremely uncomfortable downstairs and only went down there when I had to do laundry. The whole house had its issues though. No matter what time of day it was, you could always see shadows moving out of the corner of your eye. I had my colleagues come over to see if it was just my imagination, but they saw and experienced all of that stuff too. I always left the lights off when I was at work, yet when I'd come home to a locked house, I might add, there would always be lights on. I always felt completely creeped out in that place, and I never felt that way about anywhere else I've lived. I asked to be reassigned to a new housing unit and got out of there as soon as I could. Both housing units would remain vacant until Staff Sergeant S moved in with his family on the 20th of March 2006. Housing maintenance had used the duplex for storage between 1995 and 2006 with the intention of letting the house settle down, and to allow time for the people on base to start forgetting the stories going around about the duplex. Staff Sergeant S lived within Unit B for a total of 7 days before moving out. Report number 2006-03-30 provided in this brief makes the following statements from Staff Sergeant S, a member of the security police. Walking upstairs could be heard when no one was up there. The light bulb in the basement would burn out the same day it was installed, though facility maintenance couldn't find a reason for it. Shadows could be seen moving throughout the house, scaring my wife and children. The kids woke up several times with someone in the room looking at them. The family would come home several times to find the front door open and unlocked and a light on in the upstairs bedroom. The final straw, according to Staff Sergeant S, was when one of his children was playing upstairs in their room only to start screaming. When both parents ran up to see what happened, the child was reaching for his back. They lifted up his shirt to see a large red area that looked like he had been burned, even though none of the toys in that room could have caused the burn. The officer told his commander that he could put up with the strange activity in the house, but he refused to subject his wife and kids to it. They moved him out and condemned the house. On-site investigation. When I heard about this from the police investigator, I asked to see the documents about the house, and I was amazed at all the incidents. The ones I detailed above are the ones I saw, and suspect there are others that have not been documented. The final investigation, with the police and fire department, was conducted on July 17th, 2006. I was there with 5 other firefighters and 4 police officers. The house was empty. The investigation began at 21:30 in Unit A. The house had a foreboding feel to it. That alone is no confirmation of haunting. The house was cold even though it was summer, and the power had been turned off to the house. I saw a few movements of shadows out of the corner of my eye, but nothing I could document. Tech Sergeant R said he was pushed going up the stairs from the basement. One of my firefighters, Senior Airman H, said that while walking from one room to another upstairs, he saw someone standing at the base of the stairs looking up at him. When he backed up to take another look, no one was there. When we all started back downstairs, we walked into the kitchen and noticed that 2 of the cupboards were open. Knowing that I was the last one out of the kitchen and hadn't seen anything open, I know someone else caused it to happen. While everyone was fanning out throughout the living room of Unit A, with no furniture present in the structure, walking upstairs in the upstairs rooms could very easily be heard. We all looked at each other before Staff Sergeant Y asked us if we'd all heard it. We all had. Staff Sergeant D of Security Forces immediately made his way to the stairs and shouted up the stairs asking, "Who's up there?" No response was heard. We all started up the stairs, hoping to find who we just heard walking above us. The room above the living room was a secondary bedroom. Staff Sergeant D was the first to enter, and as we suspected, no one was there. No sooner than this happened do we hear someone walking up the stairs we'd all just ascended. We turn around to look down at the stairs, but there's no one there. At that point in time, Staff Sergeant T suggested it might just be the structure settling in, and that houses make noises all the time for no reason at all. I was inclined to agree with him, but things just continued to happen. The master bedroom door began closing all on its own, less than 4 feet from the closest member of our team. It is possible that the weight of all of us in the hall of an old structure would bend the supports enough to cause the door to close on its own. Staff Sergeant P pushed the door open again to see if it would close just as we'd all seen it do. The door remained ajar. I remained open to the idea that it could be the structure itself until we all heard muffled shouting through the wall. We couldn't make it out what was being said, but we knew it had to be coming from Unit B. It sounded like an argument to me. Staff Sergeant D immediately bolted down the stairs and out the front door to go to Unit B. Unit B was also completely void of all furniture. He had the key to get in and stood there trying to get the door to unlock. The key would not turn in the lock, as though it weren't the right key. We ran around to the back door and the key worked. We all went through the door and up the stairs, looking for who had been doing the yelling in a locked and vacant structure. No one was to be found. Nothing else really happened that night, aside from me possibly hearing whispering in a room next to the room we're in. Final note. When presenting this information to Colonel W, we presented what we'd experienced along with the trail of incidents that had occurred within the structure. We were thanked for our time and told to put it out of our minds. The commander ordered the structure razed due to structural instability. When the house was torn down, I know they tossed the paperwork on the house as well. I wish I had been able to keep copies of them, but the security forces refused to allow me to make copies, saying that the base wanted to keep the activity under wraps. The only reason I mention these events now is that I know the house no longer stands, and no incidents have been reported in the new houses that are roughly where that house was. Our army unit encountered a jinn. My unit in the US Army was deployed to Iraq in April of 2006. We were in Ramadi. It was 123 kilometers out of Baghdad. I was in a Humvee headed to Baghdad for emergency leave due to a death in my family. It was close to midnight and the Humvee I was in with 3 others and a turret gunner. The 2 other Humvees had the same 5 people, one in front, one in back. I was without a weapon due to my leave. The Humvee in front stopped hard. We all figured it was a possible IED or VB IED. The team leader in our HV radioed to the lead HV. The convo went along these lines.
What's up? Why did you stop? Something flew in front of the HV. What? Flew in front of the HV? Yes. We didn't see anything. Does anyone hear that? Hello? Yes, but I don't see it. Did the other 2 vehicles?
Then, out in the desert off the highway was a black figure. It looked like a huge bird. It looked like smoke was emitting from it, a blackish, greenish smoke with a blue tinge. We all focused our eyes to the 2 troops with better night vision, and we could see something, but we couldn't quite make out what it was. The smoke was distorting the view. Within a second or two, a rock was thrown at one of the HVs. A big rock like the size of a head. We all froze due to the rules of engagement. We couldn't just light it up. We used a spotlight, and in that light, something just flew straight up, and it was loud, and then we heard a loud screeching noise. Within a minute, it was over. We all sat there in a state of shock, curiosity, and panic. What the hell was that? When we got into Baghdad, the translator that they were picking up to bring to the Marines that was with us said, "It sounds like you encountered an Ifrit." Our team leader said, "What?" An Ifrit, a winged jinn. We were all a bit speechless. We chose not to disclose to our command, chalking the winged thing up as battle fatigue, now known as PTSD. Back then, this was a career killer. It's been 13 years since this happened. I met my now husband in 2015, and he had also been deployed to Ramadi with my sister unit at the time, and he had gone through this particular stretch of highway on his mid-deployment leave. He recounted a similar story to me. It was enough to stop me in my tracks. It was pretty close to mine, except that they didn't stop, they just boogied on through. Even considering how deadly my time there was, including an aid station manned by a soldier that was ambushed and blown to bits. I was a medic, so death was my norm. I still can't wrap my mind around what happened. I have a story from my time in the Navy at an Army base hospital. We were working in the old Fort Belvoir hospital before our floor was ready for us to transfer to the new hospital. The old hospital had been there since World War II, if I remember correctly. Maybe a little later, I'm not sure. It was a 5-floor hospital, the old one, and if I remember correctly, only the first and second floors were being utilized for patient care. The floors above us were used for storage where they had moved unwanted equipment or furniture. One day, me and one of my sailors went to go see if they had an extra chair on one of the storage floors. So we get up to the floor that used to be the birthing floor and nursery. We both walk past a room with an old wooden rocking chair. As we just passed it, we looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" And then my buddy asked, "Was someone sitting in the rocking chair?" I agreed and said I thought I saw someone sitting in the rocking chair as well. I went back to check and no one was sitting in it and no one else was on this floor because it was shut down. So we just kind of brushed it off and agreed that we might have seen a ghost. A few weeks later, we went back up to get something else we needed. We went back up to the same floor and we walked past the same room with the rocking chair. I saw a note taped onto the chair. The note read something along the lines of, "Please do not use or remove." I found that odd and asked my boss, who had been at this hospital a lot longer than me, why no one could touch that plain old rocking chair. He told me this was the rocking chair in the nursery mothers would use to rock and spend time with their stillborn babies. That blew my mind and confirmed what me and my buddy had seen could have been a mother who was rocking her stillborn. When we witnessed it, we didn't know if it was a man or a woman since we were not looking directly into the room. We were just sure we saw a person, so I'm pretty sure we saw a grieving mother rocking her baby. My sailor who witnessed this took his own life not too long after. He stayed at the old hospital at a small clinic they kept open there while the rest of us transferred to the new hospital. Not saying him taking his life had anything to do with that, but the person who witnessed it with me is no longer with us. I deployed a few times but never witnessed anything on deployments like that again. My time in Korea while serving as a US Marine had some unexpected encounters. Quick backstory. I enlisted when I was 17 back in 2011 for multiple reasons, but I mostly just wanted to serve and fight. Typical 17-year-old jock video gamer, right? Anyways, even though I was a 0331 machine gunner in the infantry, I never saw combat because the war had died down quite a bit and I got sent all over Asia and the Pacific instead. But shit got weird in Korea. We were sent to this island just miles off the DMZ of North Korea to train with the Republic of South Korean Marines. It's a small island, maybe 10 miles across, but it had an insane amount of hills. While on the island, we were camping on this small ridge that nearly surrounded the campsite. Perfect location to set up at. You're concealed, there's only one way in and one way out, ideal for a military camp. It rained a lot there, so we stored our weapons and ammunition in this small, run-down bunker just up the ridge from our site. We took shifts guarding it overnight, and let me tell you, it got weird. I'm sleeping in my tent when I wake up to use the restroom. On my way back, I see the strobe light from my friend standing watch up on the hill. This is not normal. He was trying to signal someone without waking anyone up from yelling. So I head over to check on him, and he is shaking. Eyes wide, complete fear, panic mode. The conversation went something like this. "Hey man, are you okay? Something is up here." "What do you mean, like North Koreans?" "No, worse. I'm hearing voices. I saw shadows. I can hear rustling in the bunker, but every time I check, there's nothing there." "Jesus, you sure you don't have sleep deprivation?" "No man, I'm completely fine, but I'm freaking out. Could you just chill with me till I calm down?" "Sure, dude." It was around 0300 when I stayed with him. Everyone was gonna be awake in 2 hours as it is, so it wouldn't be too long if I stayed up there with him anyway. Nothing happened while I was with him. So around 0400, he was back to normal and the sun was on the horizon. I told him if he needed anything to yell and went back to bed for an hour. The following night, it was my shift overnight. From 2200 to 0130, it was quiet. It was kind of peaceful. But at 1:45, I heard footsteps. The bunker was to my back and I was facing the camp, seeing as how the only way to reach this bunker is from the camp unless you climb a 90-degree cliff from the other side of the ridge without anyone noticing. Everyone is asleep and the footsteps were behind me near the bunker. I turned around and saw nothing. Shortly after, I can hear faint whispers. Definitely not English. I could almost make out Korean phrases, but it was too faint to know for sure. This is where I start getting nervous. I remember seeing my friend's face when I came up to see him. His fear was genuine, very real, and I was starting to see why. Then a little later, I hear something in the bunker. I turn my light on and shine it in the bunker. No one is in there. And at 0300, I hear it again. This time, thinking it was nothing again, I turn to look without my light, and see the shadows of someone standing over the SMAWs, bending down to pick one up. I raised my rifle at him and shouted, "Get out of there!" And it turned its head, looked at me, and vanished. Just evaporated, like Spider-Man in Infinity War. Panic struck me. I was freaking out like my friend. In my head I was thinking, what good is this 5.56 M4 against a ghost? Nothing else happened after that, but I was on edge till sunrise. I kept the story to myself until my unit got back to Japan, where we were stationed. One night we were all drinking, shooting the breeze, and a different friend asked us if the island seemed creepy to us. My first friend mentioned his experience on watch, and everyone, I mean everyone, had some kind of similar story to tell from when they were on watch. Turns out this island was a hotspot for strategic positioning and planning during the war, and thousands of soldiers and civilians died there. I guess the war isn't over for them yet.